Hello readers and welcome back to Tell Between Tales. Today we are going to be discussing Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries and Map of the Otherlands. And am I the only person who thought that this book was written by Emily Wilde? Because it says Emily Wilde right on the top. I got this book and then I realized it says a novel by Heather Fawcett. It's not written by Emily Wilde. Written by Heather Fawcett. This is the Emily Wilde series, and let's dig in. All right, so first let's start with the Encyclopedia of Faeries. Encyclopedia of Faeries is classified as a romantasy / cozy fantasy book, and I definitely think that it veers more on the cozy side of fantasy versus the romantasy side, because the romance in this book, first of all, it doesn't appear until like this far into the book. Maybe that's a little too far, but it's way like 2/3 of the way into the book. You don't even get the romance thread. So I would definitely not really classify this as a romantasy. The romance does not drive the plot forward. The plot is affected by the romance, especially in the latter part of the book, but it's not a driving force for the story. And so really what we have is Emily Wilde, who is a scholar at Oxford, and she is a scholar of fairies, and she studies the Fae, and the Fae in this world are really interesting. There's a lot of stories that they put in the back of this one. They're like, oh, here's just some stories that are pertinent to the events of what happened in the book about the Fae. And Emily, she collects all of these stories. She knows tons and tons and thousands of stories and has been able to pull all of the themes together from different stories and really knows how to interact with the common Fae, which are kind of like the lower classification of Fae. They can appear usually as different types of beasts. So we get Poe in this one. She names him Poe because he's got like a little raven skin over him, so named him after Edgar Allan Poe. And he's got like sharp claws, and they describe what he looks like. He looks very different. And there's all sorts of different common Fae that she interacts. They all look different and behave different, and there's different lore circling around each one. And this is written from, like, as it's Emily Wilde's journal. And so she's writing in it. And because she's writing in it, we get footnotes down here at the bottom. So she might be referencing something that she's talking about and give us some more scholarly definition of it and reference somebody else's paper. And what that does is it kind of opens up the world and the lore to us so that we can understand a little bit better about these Fae and what the scholars have researched about them and what they know about them. And I thought that was a nice touch. Some of the footnotes I didn't care for, but some of them I really enjoyed. So the footnotes for me were kind of hit and miss, although I did appreciate them, and I appreciate what the author is doing with them in expanding her lore and the richness of her world through them. They're also written in this really teeny tiny print. So we have like the main print, and then this is like really teeny tiny. And so I can see how that might be a little bit difficult for some people. I don't know how they did that on the audio, because obviously I read this one through the book. And so Emily Wilde, it starts off where she goes to Lajosland, which I believe is in Scandinavia. It's Ravensvik Lajosland. And so she is there, she's studying the local Fae of the area. She is working on her encyclopedia. It's been a project that she's been working on for years and years and years, and this is the last piece that she is studying and accumulating stories and evidence and information about for this piece for her encyclopedia before she can publish it. And so that's where we start off. She's planning on spending about 6 months to a year in this place, studying the local fae and the stories. And she is not a people person. She is very much a, I like to be by myself type of person. And so she ends up insulting people pretty easily, and she doesn't have very good social skills. And so she shows up and everything is going just terrible, and it's cold, and she can't keep the fire going, and people are being mean to her. And then fairly shortly thereafter, her colleague Wendell Bamblebee shows up, and he is the opposite of her. He is charismatic, and he is gorgeous, and he is lazy, and he brings his graduate students to do all the work for him. And she's like, well, at least we have a fire now. And so he helps her to connect with the local townspeople so that she can get the stories about their local fae as she goes out into the forest and she interacts with the common fae. And there's also, besides the common fae, there's the courtly fae, and those are going to be your human-esque, your human. They look like humans. They look like people versus like the creatures. That the common fae look like creatures and the courtly fae look like humans. And both of these groups of fae are mischievous and they can be very deadly. Some of them can be friendly. There's like the brownies, and then there's the different types of household fae that help out with like the mending and the cooking and the cleaning. And sometimes, a household can adopt a fae or a fae family, like of the common fae, like the little brownies, and they help out, and the people, like the homeowners, the people who live there, will give them offerings, and then in exchange they help out doing some stuff. And so those are like really the only good type of fae, but all the others are very mischievous. They like to torment people. People get very caught up in the enchantments of the courtly fae. So being around and exposed to the courtly fae is very dangerous to humans because you can't eat their food. It causes you to dance, and you can't drink their wine. And just being around them, it gets there's all these enchantments that muddle your mind and make you do things and forget time. And there's also like this, it's also got portal magic in it, I would say, because there is fairy, which is the land that the fae are from. And then there's the human world. And it's very dangerous for humans to go into fairy because they can get lost in there and they can't find their way back a lot of times. And they often go in and become enchanted, especially if they're anywhere near the courtly fae, and then they just end up being lost. And so she is studying all of this and the local stories, which is what which is driving the story forward. And we're really getting involved in the lore of Lajosland and the Lajosland courtly fae. And so she goes off on this adventure. She ends up getting wrapped up in in all of the fairiness that's going on, we'll just say. And then I really like the interactions between Emily and Wendell. I like Wendell's character. He's funny, he's cute, he's annoying. And so I just really liked both of their characters a lot. And I like their interactions between each other. I love their banter and their play back and forth. And how, she's always like, well, you're always so lazy. And he's like, oh, you're always so strict. And so it's great. This is a great read. There's a lot of moments in it that just made me smile. And it's not trying to necessarily be funny. It's not a comedy. It's just that the way that it's written is very uplifting and lighthearted and very fun to read. And there's definitely, the characters get themselves wrapped up in some pretty serious situations. And I'd really enjoy, one of my favorite parts in the whole book is when Wendell writes in her diary. And so that's just great. It's priceless. And And so then the sequel, Map of the Otherlands, this one, if I loved it. I mean, I could say that it's got kind of the same outline as the first one, and that they're out in the research field and then all of these things are happening. I don't want to say anything about the ending, but the ending, the overall arc of the story kind of follows the same script or the same key points of like, okay, this happens and then this happens and then this is how it's going to end, right? But that didn't bother me at all because it really is a continuation from the first one. And I'm going to talk spoilers now about the first one. So if you are not wanting to get spoiled by the first book, I would definitely click off now. And so let's get started with Map of the Otherlands. So what I wanted to say to finish that thought of the setup is that with the same setup, it's got where Emily and Wendell, they go off. They're on an expedition. They're trying to find his door, right? His fairy door. And so just like in Encyclopaedia of Faeries, where they're on the expedition in Jocelyn studying the local fae, in this one, they go off into the mountains of the Netherlands and they're trying to find his door. And so it's more of Emily and Wendell being out doing research, trying to find fairy, well, right, this one, the whole thing is riddled with fairy doors. Whereas this one was very much more focused on the fairy lore and the Jocelyn courtly fae and that whole, the whole story about the king in the tree. This one is about all the different doors. And this one is much more has a much bigger theme of getting lost in fairy and stumbling into a fairy door and being lost. And they're trying to find De Grey, which is a scholar who had been there and doing research previously. And so they're following up on that research, trying to find the back door to Wendell's kingdom. And so, of course, they get involved with the locals, and then things happen where things go south, and then at the end they all end up in fairy, right? So at the end of Encyclopaedia of Faeries, they all end up in the fairy kingdom with Emily trapped by the king of the Jocelyn fairy court, and with this one, Emily goes into fairy, and it all ends up, finishes in fairy, and then they come out, and then you get them leaving and going back. So kind of the overall arc is the same, but the individual things that happen, like it felt natural. It's like, yeah, you're a researcher, you're going to go on expeditions. Like this book kind of already set it up in that I was expecting that the next book was going to be about them finding the door. Like this book ends with them getting their research money and their grant money, so that way they can go find Wendell's door. And so I wasn't very surprised at all that that's what this book was about. It's all about them looking for that. So it felt very natural that they would again be going on an expedition, and they would be, of course, meeting with the local people and exploring the surrounding area and figuring out all the local lore. And then, of course, there's got to be conflict. So there's things that happen. And so I didn't mind that at all. I really enjoyed a lot of Wendell and Emily in here. If there was any criticism at all that I had between them, it would be that it was kind of irking to me that Emily was like, oh, when he does this, it frightens me. And then I saw this about him, this new revelation about Wendell, of things that he could do, and I was so frightened. And I was like, yeah, but you really saw a lot of what Wendell could do in the first book, and he's a courtly fae, and he's the king of his realm, and just like, one of her colleagues points it out to her several times. She's like, all of these things. And he's trying to dissuade her from, getting too attached to Wendell. And so I'm kind of in my mind being like, you already know all of this stuff from the scholarly side and from the personal experience side. I don't quite understand why it was written in here that she's like, I'm so afraid when he does this. I'm like, really? I mean, and the other thing too is that she gets over it really fast. So it's like, oh, I'm really afraid. And then we're like, okay, you know, that's all water under the bridge. We're cool now. We're back in love, maybe. Because she doesn't know yet if she's going to marry him. Unless you've read the whole book and then you know. And so anyway, this was a really great series. I gave both books a 5 out of 5 just because I loved it so much. It was very whimsical and fun, and I would definitely recommend reading this series. And I am very much looking forward to the Compendium of Lost Tales. And I'm going to now talk spoilers about Map of the Otherlands. So if you haven't read this book, you might want to click off now, and we'll catch you in the next one. So Map of the Otherlands, I mean, how many times can I say that I loved it? I really enjoyed how she wove the story together. I mean, at the very beginning, we have the ribbons man that we're introduced to. Actually, the very first thing I tabbed is the foot, because it just made me laugh so much. Just this, but fairy remains, mummified or not, have been known to slip away as the fancy takes them, and I can only assume that feet are particularly inclined to such wanderlust. It just made me laugh. I've got some tabs in here of moments that made me laugh. That one made me laugh. I feel like more of the beginning made me laugh than later on as it got a little bit more serious. So I like how, I mean, just right in the beginning, if you're paying attention, which I obviously wasn't, but it made me laugh. She introduces the foot, and she's got this mummified foot. And then immediately after, she meets the ribbons man, and how you find out that those two things are connected because they're all parts from the same fawn. And she's got the foot from the fawn, and then he's got a piece as well, a tooth, I believe, of the same fawn. And once she gets the foot, that's what draws him to her. And then, of course, de Grey being the one who's slashing at their door every night because she's got the horn, and all of those coming together and everything drawing them together. So she had the right idea where the fairy foot was going to help lead her to de Grey and help lead her to the Nexus. And except that it just didn't come all together in the way that she expected. And I liked that twist. So another part that made me laugh is just the banter back and forth between Emily and Wendell. I mean, at the beginning, they're at the cafe. So Wendell says, "What have you gotten there? And what is all this smirking about? You're up to something." "I don't know what you mean," I said, pressing my lips together to contain said smirk. So I just love the banter back and forth between them, and you get a lot of it throughout the whole book, and then they get a little bit more serious. I like how it's not constant. Like, they do come around more in the second half of the book to have more serious conversations, especially as it becomes more and more clear that Wendell is dying of this poison. And Emily is forced to confront her feelings of what exactly do I want to do, because he's dying and I'm either going to go all in and save him because I love him and this is the path I choose, or I'm walking away. So I really liked the development of that storyline there and how that all came around. And I have some tabs in here of just Wendell being Wendell. You know, what was kind of funny was that they actually found the Nexus. I wasn't sure if I was like, oh, I feel like not satisfied. Like, dang it, like they found the Nexus, and Wendell was like thrown out by the gnome smashing the teacups on him. And so I just had such conflicting feelings when it was revealed that that was where the Nexus was and that they found it. And because there was this like cranky gnome who lived in there, that they didn't actually find it earlier. I mean, of course, it's like right here, like halfway through the book is where they find it. So of course they can't find it here. I mean, you all know they're going to find the Nexus at the end of the book. But I also liked how they found the Nexus and then Emily went in by herself without Wendell, and she was able to kind of conquer his kingdom of her own fortitude, even though she did have help. And I really liked that. I liked how she went in there and the mess that she made, but she also was able to poison the queen. Like, she's so smart and so sneaky. And even though she's enchanted, I really loved it. I was kind of surprised though, because when she's in Fairy, that she figured out what the compass did, that it really pointed to who you could trust. And she realizes that, she makes that connection. But I guess, it does go with her character, because she doesn't trust Wendell's cat when the compass is pointing to her. And even the second time when she's like, I'm going to trust her from now on. Like, I didn't trust her the first time and it got us into a bad situation and we barely escaped from it. And so I'm going to trust her now. And then immediately after she makes that decision, she doesn't trust the cat. She's like, no, don't go that way. And then she's kind of forced to follow her through. I was like, but you just decided that you were going to trust the cat. And so I was like, come on, Emily. But I'm not sure if that more just speaks to Emily's character flaws and that she is so strong-willed. And you see that her and Rose are butting heads the whole expedition. She's like, no, this is my expedition. We're going to do it this way. I'm not going to listen to anything you say. I'm not going to take criticisms from you. I'm not going to take suggestions from you. We're going to do it my way. So that's definitely, a flaw that is revealed throughout the book. And so it's kind of like, I want to bang you on the head, but I don't want to say it's a flaw in the book, because I do think that it is true to her character. And I really liked just how cute it was between Emily and Wendell. I like how this book doesn't have a lot of spice. I'm not the type of person who likes to read tons and tons of spice in my books. So this one was great. This one had just the right amount. And which was pretty much nothing. Like, there's like a couple scenes where they kiss, and then Emily is like, oh, we're gonna figure out like my feelings for you, at least in this regard. And then it's like the next morning, which I guess makes sense. She's writing in her journal. I don't know who writes down that kind of stuff in their journal, so maybe that would be really, really awkward. But it also wouldn't, I don't know, I feel like it wouldn't fit with the overall theme of the book and the tone of the book, like, if you get my drift. So one of my favorite scenes in the book is actually when Wendell is reorganizing and re-cleaning their whole cabin. Only a few moments, unfortunately, for he soon stormed back in and, as I had predicted, began straightening things up. Ariadne leapt up to help him, taking a cloth and scrubbing hopefully at random surfaces. It's like, it's that feeling of, when you want to be helpful, but you're not sure of how to be helpful, and you're trying to do something where you're like, maybe this will help. I just loved that. It was really good. And then I liked a lot of the conversations too that Emily had with Rose about she's like, how Emily's got blinders on when it comes to Wendell. And he's like, my point, Rose says, as you know, Emily, is that the usefulness of fairy artifacts in resolving fairy mysteries is dubious at best, contrary to the specious claims of the less responsible set of scholars. You disdain the locals' trust in their ribbons, reasoning quite correctly that the folk may make mischief with them, and yet here you are, placing your faith in a magic foot. I like their relationship, how he's older and has a bit more experience, and she's the younger of the scholars and bringing in all of the new research methods, and they really butt heads over that. But their story is more of like, you have the tried and true methods and you have the new methods, and you're not really supposed to pick one or the other. It's a melding of the two that's going to result in the best scholarship and the best methods. You kind of need to pick what works the best from both of them. And so they're constantly arguing back and forth, but they do come to an understanding over the course of the book, with him, saying, there's several moments when he says, okay, you were right and I was wrong, and we're going to do it your way. And then I think that the scene where Emily is humbled is very important, because we see how her confidence and her pride has made her overly bold, and she really takes that to heart. And she also has to figure out how to overcome her mistakes and realize that, yes, I caused this, and let's see how we can fix it. So I like how Rose comes in that moment, because he has been her biggest critic throughout the whole story. He's the one that can then help her in that time, in that moment when she's fallen and she's ruined the expedition, and he's the one that gets her out of feeling sorry for herself and gets her into, yes, you've made a mistake. You need to acknowledge that. And now, because you got us into this situation, you need to figure out how to get us out of this situation. And that is how you handle mistakes. So he really comes through as the mentor of and the bringer of wisdom from having had these other experiences. So I think that, in the beginning of the book, at least for me, it was very much, oh, I'm on Emily's side, and this guy is so annoying, and why is he even on this expedition? He just weaseled his way in there. He doesn't even like her. He's trying to get rid of her. And he weaseled his way onto this expedition so he can steal her glory. But he becomes a very important counterpoint to Emily in their logic and in their philosophy and in their beliefs about how to go about doing the research as well. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Map of the Otherlands. I would really love to hear your thoughts as well. Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.